First off, I do want to thank Jenny Hallwell, Elizabeth Wood, and the whole of the Docs team, especially Sean and Tilly, for allowing us to do this right here, right now. I'm Jane Ray, and this audio showcase is where we highlight emerging audio talent and celebrate the winners of our Documentary Funding Award, the RAFA. This is the first time we've been able to get together since the pandemic hit us. So we have lots to share, and it's great to be back in the room all together. Thank you for coming. A few shout outs. It's lovely to see friends and family. Hi to our founder and chair of the judging committee, Valerie Kleeman, all the way from France to be here tonight. We've got Talia Augustidis, a wonderful runner-up in this year's RAFA. Alan Hall, fine wicker judge over the years and CEO of Falling Tree. Kyron Edwards, the winner of our pop-up competition. We've got Curtis Gallant, Sam Stone, both wonderful interns for the Whickers, now off doing audio things for the BBC and at Goldsmiths. And our fabulous audio documentary students from UCL. Put your hands up if you're an audio documentary student from the... Oh yes, welcome, welcome. Partners and friends. It feels like the whole family are in the house tonight. Now, you've all got a copy, I hope, of this menu. And you will see that we're going to start with an amuse-bouche, a little something to stimulate the audio appetite. Who here just loves the sound of their own voice? Yep, I thought so. Day one of the audio documentary course at UCL is an exercise to at least get students used to the sound of their own voice. They have to speak into their phone like this, like that, and edit out any retakes using the computer software system of their choice. To give them something to talk about, I suggested the thing you failed to throw away. Reason being, I have this theory that the things you choose to keep are the things that you would like people to know about you. Books, trainers, the complete works of David Cassidy from 1972 to 2018. Don't judge me, but whatever. Whereas the things that you fail to throw away tell you something about who you really are. What I didn't expect was that every one of these test pieces told a story. Here are just two. A couple of brave souls who've kindly agreed to let us showcase theirs. Remember, this is the first exercise they did on the course. Jake Walker's main degree is in fine art at the Slade, and the thing you need to know at this stage is that his mum's a nurse, so he does know certain things about how diseases manifest through ordinary daily life, like writing a shopping list. And then Zoe Andrews, third-year Arts and Science degree, president of the Mindfulness Society, and I was intrigued to find out, works in a lavender farm in the centre of London. You will hear Jake first. Curtis, hit that key.
This is a shopping list that I found in a supermarket years ago. The shopping list is on a white piece of lined paper, and there's about 10 lines, but it's not easy to read what's on the shopping list. The handwriting is all sort of jaggedy and not clear at all, but I can work out a few of the lines. One of them says 2 what's on TV. One of them says tea bags, Dettol all-purpose, 3 pots of milk, but it wouldn't be a pot of milk. It's quite hard to work out what all the lines are. And the more I looked at this shopping list, I think I started to realise that the person who had written this list probably has Parkinson's. The handwriting is so jagged and looks really strained. It's quite emotional to look at it, actually, thinking that the person who wrote this maybe really struggled to write it. So while this started as something that I failed to throw away, it then actually turned into something that I started to collect. So after holding on to this for about 3 years, I then started to collect other handwritten messages that I found on the floor.
It's ceramic. I'm still yet to find anything to do with this pot. It's enclosed, so you can't really fit anything in, and it's quite rough. It's quite spiky, so you can't really hold it. It's not very heavy. It would fit in the palm of your hand. From halfway up, it splits into 8 different legs that meet together in the top and weave upon each other together like a cat's cradle. I'm a bit ashamed to say that I made it, considering that I now find myself a ceramics teacher, but I guess this object encapsulates the beginning of my journey, which that too was a rocky start. I've always been interested in art, but I always had curiosity for clay, and my mum surprised me by taking me on a taster course at a studio in London called Scandius. So we rock up there. I'm really, really excited. Finally I can have a play with clay. And then we're at the wrong studio. So we rebooked another time and went to these studios on Tillier Road in de Beauvoir, like Dalston. It was George who was running the class and gave us an introduction into the world of clay. And I was taught to make a pinch pot. I made a pinch pot. However, I got quite bored quite quickly and ended up just messing around with some clay. And the night before, I just watched the Netflix documentary My Octopus Teacher, and I found that film had a profound impact on me. Seeing this documentary producer having lost his touch with the world, lost his place in it, I guess, and his journey home. In that moment, I knew that clay was going to be my journey home. A year and a half later, I'm now a teacher at the Scandius Studios, and I am now running the classes that I went to. So I guess this is the cradle for this journey I'm on. And that is why I can't throw it away.
There you go, a whole life cycle in round about 90 seconds of audio. I hope you give that a try at home. The original pot may have got broken, we learned afterwards. I'm sorry to hear about that. I hope you kept the pieces, Zoe. But you can see it in the menu. There it is. And I just have to ask you, which is better, that photo or your imagining? We're off to India now, and there's a broken pot to spot in the next piece. The RAFA is an international funding award. Our founder, Alan Whicker, was most famous for Whickers World, not Whickers WC1N. And our runner-up, 2020, is Priyanka Gaikwad from Bhopal. Priyanka impressed the judges with her grasp of the societal and economic pressures on women in her country to marry, and to marry within caste. She also shows a rare talent, and Alan had this too. Women in particular are very comfortable opening up to them about things that are very deep and difficult to talk about in public. By necessity, this is a work in progress. COVID has devastated both Priyanka's country and her family. But as this 12-minute extract shows, she's back up and running and ready for your feedback. Priyanka is very sorry not to be here tonight in person, but she sent us this short introduction.
I had not thought of winning this, so I couldn't believe it. I was asking my friends to read mail from Whickers and tell me if it was true or not. I really thank Whickers and the whole team, the mentors who accompanied me throughout this process and enabled me to make this documentary, Unmatched Lives. This documentary explores the lives of 4 women who may or may not want to get married. We also understand how gender, patriarchy, class, caste, religion, concept of beauty, feminism, and disgrace influences their life. I do really wish that I could be there at the event, but as the work is in progress and lot of work has to be done, sound wise and story wise also, but I really hope that it would be really interesting to listen, for you to listen to it and connect to it in some ways. Thank you so much.
Look, he is such a nice boy. Why don't you get married to him?
But I want things my way. If a family has 3 daughters, all 3 get married and leave.
You should be of use to someone.
Interfere in our married and lying about it.
You must not laugh loudly.
When people say this thing,
if you try, will take care of you when you go.
motherhood is not limited to giving birth.
To improve your minds.
If the boy can live with my family, first my mother will think you are doing their religion. Not that I am doing. That I agree to anything.
Why should I change myself?
Also important that I feel. If I look back to my 20s, it was all about college and marriages. Our ideas about marriages were very dreamlike. Whatever our imaginations lacked, we learned from soap operas such as those of Ekta Kapoor's. They always made it so exciting that my friends and I would talk endlessly about what kind of wedding dress we would wear, and we would think about having a husband up to the point we would leave the wedding with him in the car. Now you are listening to Rubina Khan and my age is 33. Right now I work with an organization which fosters better education for children from marginalized communities.
Mom gives me a lot of freedom. She says, get hitched to someone you like or let me find you someone. But I think I don't want that kind of marriage at all. The idea of someone coming to gawp at me, I make an entrance with tea on the tray. I hate that idea. That's not me. I don't want to marry a stranger or someone I have only known for a month. No one should. Hi, my name is Lata. I am 32 years old. The root of my identity is in the theatre. I set up my own company. It's called Trisha Natya Sanstha. The Trisha Theatre organization, that's my life now.
And so it goes. Kids, I mean like girls, get really happy thinking about the money and comfort marriage will bring them. But it's not for me to be sent so far away from Bhopal to Raipur. Who wants to live so far away from home? Not me. I don't crave gold or silver and a life of status and grandeur. I don't want a car and all this stuff. I don't want to marry at all. It has led a lot of quarrels. Papa broke a pot on my name. He performed my last rites as if I had died. Hi, I am Bali. I am 29 years old and I teach young children in a school.
Weddings are beautiful, no? Food, music, dance, lavish parties, and lots of love and respect coming from the society. But what if you're not married or don't want to? Will this much of love and respect be poured on you too? I think yes, but in the form of peeping eyes into your life and decisions. Hi, I am Priyanka Gaikwad, and I met these 3 women from different backgrounds, and I've been thinking a lot about them and listening to the stories of their unmatched lives or world and trying to make a sense of my life.
We are filming this, so Priyanka will hear your warm applause and appreciate any feedback that you can give later on. We will share her finished doc in due course, and you can play a part in that after the session finishes, just before 8 o'clock. There will be free drinks in the bar one floor up. Thanks to Valerie. And you can pass on any thoughts to me, to Emily. I was going to say Jane, but she has to leave us, and Curtis here on the front row. Now, you will have picked up by now that we at the Whickers delight in bringing unheard or rarely heard voices to the fore. And our RAFA winner in 2020 is no exception. First, we're going to play you 2.5 minutes of the teaser material that Mads Mordigan submitted with her written application. All you need to know at this point is that the speaker originally comes from Macclesfield, that they identify as non-binary, that they're a professional sex worker and an amateur stand-up comic, and their stage name is Pussy Willow.
Cobbled streets weaving through small stone houses, sheltered by green hills rolling up to the Peak District. To an outsider's eye, Macclesfield, a little town in the north of England, looks peaceful, almost romantic. But Jessica sees it differently.
People who romanticise small towns never grew up in one. What's to romanticise? There's naught to do. Everyone's on drugs. People act like gangsters despite the fact the place is surrounded by sheep fields. Ah, home sweet home, the smell of fertiliser and casual bigotry really takes me back to my childhood.
Jessica's been writing material about Macclesfield. She's a comedian. She moved to Bristol 10 years ago. Until now, she didn't want to come back. She's been thinking to return with a stand-up show. But on this trip, she just wants to do a recce and introduce herself properly, starting with her name. It's maybe a new name to some people in Macclesfield, but she's had it since she was a child.
I've been having what I can now look back at and see as dysphoria for a year or so, but I didn't know what it was back then. The first time it happened was the first time that I saw a picture of a naked woman and the sense of dissonance of I'll never look like that. And then it had happened numerous times since. And me and my mum were sat and we put Who Framed Roger Rabbit on. Jessica Rabbit walks out dancing, and I had that dissonance. I had that I'll never look like that. And I had this real confusing mess in my head. And I turned to my mum and I was like, Mum, do any real women look like that? And my mum said, no real woman looks like that. Women like that are created. I didn't really pay attention for a while because I was sat thinking, I can create this. And I realised the first thing, if you're going to create something, the first thing I needed was a name. And that's why I chose Jessica.
Even though she'd chosen Jessica at 11, she only fully came out as Jessica 3 years ago. Until then, people would still use her birth name, her dead name. Because coming out isn't one moment, or even a nice, neat, straight line. It's a process of twists and loops. And the reaction of family and friends can move you forward or push you right back.
My dad used to publish motorcycle magazines, and I grew up around going to Bulldog Bash and these big Hells Angels events and drag racing. And although it's not really a queer scene, it's a very alternative scene.
That was recorded and mixed by an inspired someone whose day job is teaching students how to sculpt art out of wood at Goldsmiths. However, she's also learned a whole lot of other new skills through volunteering at Radio Ava. Please give a warm welcome to our RAFA winner 2020, Mads Mordigan. Where are you, Mads? Oh, you're there! Right. Now, if you sit there, and I'll sit here, and we'll pick up. Now, if you've got a question that you're burning to ask, shout it out now, and Tilly will help. She can come to you. If you're busy formulating your question, and I'm looking at Emily, who's going to give me you tell me when we get to about 4 minutes, will you, Emily? Excellent, because that means we've got a minute to go. Anybody got a question? Would like a minute to build it up in your mind and then grab Tilly's mic. She's busy. She's going to disinfect it between each handhold. Mads, it's great to have you here. So, the initial plan, right, it seemed so easy. You were going to rock up to the first performance Pussy Willow gives in the hometown that she feels drove her out. Adds in some vox pops, some post-gig reflections, and hey presto, you've got an inbuilt narrative, you've got a story. So
yeah, that was going to be that easy. They were going to put on the gig, we were going to go there, you were going to come and help us at the...
I was going to hand out the popcorn.
It was going to be lovely, but then, yeah, that simple to follow story were two things that was going to be in last autumn, which obviously then there was a sort of rolling state of lockdown.
Exactly that, all the pubs and bars shut.
Yeah, and planning live events seemed really hard. And then, so that was one big problem. The other main thing was in amongst that, with the rolling lockdowns and COVID, obviously for sex workers, COVID annihilated their livelihood.
Yeah.
And so for Pussy Willow, it that led to housing precarity, it led to mental health stuff. The whole situation of COVID just meant that there was no way that anybody had the time or energy to be able to put on that live event.
And also there was a cultural change because there was a row brewing, wasn't there? Because transphobia and trans rights hit the headlines big time, and suddenly people were on sofas all across our screens all around the country opining about it.
Yeah, when we were first talking about doing Jezebels as the documentary, we thought that the sort of more controversial part would be the sex work element, because people, that is often a controversial thing when it comes to how people understand it. And then as it went on, it turned out, the trans debate became
more and more heated.
Yeah.
And it brought out, there was a big court case between the Tavistock Clinic and Quincy Bell.
Yeah, it scared people. The Tavistock Clinic case has some weird links to Macclesfield and to some of their story.
Really?
But that investigation that a journalist came into and was talking to the contributors of this about security and internet security and potential harassment, because so much of this stuff was being played out online. In COVID especially, people were just like hauling up behind their computers and then spewing out harassment there. And that also took a toll on people as to how much they wanted to put their head above the parapet and talk.
If at that point it hadn't been for the Wicker funding, that we'd given you this whopping great heavy paperweight of a trophy and put a bit of cash in the bank, would you have just thought, actually, I'm going to walk away from this now? What influence did it have?
I think if the trophy hadn't been as heavy, it would have been easier. No, I mean, the fact that you have to just carry it on, you don't have your ability to just like push a good idea under the carpet and walk away from it, which is something I think we do all the time.
The trophy was staring at you.
It was right there, the money was there. But more importantly than that, you get the money, but you get the mentoring. And I got, for my mentor, I got Ibby.
Yes.
And that, I think I would have given up, I would have lost my confidence, I did lose the thread many times. I felt like I was, like swimming in tape, and completely lost sort of idea and structure, and would have definitely not managed to continue it if I hadn't had that influence. I can't actually see Ibby right now, but
she's there and she's going to come up and speak to us. This is what we love about the Wickers. We're passing it on. Ibby was our winner in 2019 and Mads the year later, and Ibby was enormously helpful to both Priyanka and Mads. Has anybody got a question? Yes, hello. Tilly will come to you with the newly sanitised microphone. There you go, just passing it down, and hello.
I was just wondering how you found out about Pussy Willow and what inspired you to make the piece in the first place.
Good question.
So Radio AVA was a radio project that was set up for sex workers and to produce content by sex workers and allies, specifically to deal with how poorly they're portrayed, or like how rarely their stories are portrayed with any depth. Like often the stories that are funded are sort of reformist stories where you hear the terrible time they had as a sex worker, but now happily they are off in a better profession. And those are the stories that people felt more comfortable telling. So AVA was set up to give people the technical ability to be able to produce that content that they wanted to. And so it was through that I met Pussy.
Was it easy to persuade her to? No.
Pussy's a performer, so because she's a comedian, she is an eternal performer. Very easy to persuade her to want to be engaged. Easy to continually get her to reliably do things like interviews or anything like that was trickier. Let's say.
Anybody else with a question? One aspect of this that intrigues me. Just this week, a book was published, The Hidden History of You in Forbes. And it speaks to the way the story has shifted from being one about sex workers to being one about the rights of trans people. And it's that seems to be something that you are picking up on in the way you're developing this story. Because, I mean, what this story that exploded this week about a guy who in the 1960s triggered a court case that took away the rights for people who changed gender to have their birth certificate corrected, which is something that hasn't come back fully now. I mean, since the Transgender Act 2004, we've got the right to have a new birth certificate, but not the right that was enshrined in law right up until the 1960s. Before this curious case.
Based around what the monarchy needed.
Based around the law primogeniture, that they couldn't... Yeah. It was all about the royal lineage, wasn't it, that changed the law so that... So
that affected the law that affects all of the people, so that this one family...
Yes, knows where they stand.
Great. Yeah, I mean, that like, I hadn't heard of that. Like, that having... The UN Forbes case is like, it's incredible that through all of this discussion of trans stuff, we, like, so many people don't realize where the laws come from even. And it's great that this stuff's getting a bit more airtime.
But it's sort of getting back to a pre-1960s understanding.
I mean, I honestly couldn't have imagined when we started this project, but even like before that, I was listening to an interview with the person that wrote the book about UN Forbes, and they said that when they started out doing some research, they just made this assumption that things were going to progress to becoming
sort of in a smooth line,
you know, more progressive, but like easier for trans people. And in fact, it's done such a U-turn, and I don't think any of us really saw that coming. And I guess that's halfway through making this project, I was like, everyone's talking about this now. By the time this actually gets on air, it's going to become irrelevant because everything will have been said. But in all of this political debate, one thing that I do think that we're still making this, which I guess will come up in that next segment, is people actually being able to put themselves in the place of that person and really hearing that stuff where you actually get to understand not their political or their ideological ideas, but really just like inside them as a person. Yeah. And that, you know, that's kind of crucial.
That's the perfect introduction. We're now going to hear an extract from what happened next. And this is somebody called Jessica Rabbit, who is going back for the first time since they left Macclesfield. They're going back possibly to do a braver thing than standing up on stage and doing an act, just going back and hanging out in the pub down the road. So let's hear Jessica now.
Cobbled streets weaving through small stone houses, sheltered by green hills rolling up to the Peak District. To an outsider's eye, Macclesfield, a little town in the north of England, looks peaceful, almost romantic. But Jessica sees it differently.
People who romanticise small towns never grew up in one. What's to romanticise? There's naught to do. Everyone's on drugs. People act like gangsters despite the fact the place is surrounded by sheep fields. Ah, home sweet home, the smell of fertiliser and casual bigotry really takes me back to my childhood.
Jessica's been writing material about Macclesfield. She's a comedian. She moved to Bristol 10 years ago. Until now, she didn't want to come back. She's been thinking to return with a stand-up show. But on this trip, she just wants to do a recce and introduce herself properly, starting with her name. It's maybe a new name to some people in Macclesfield, but she's had it since she was a child.
I've been having what I can now look back at and see as dysphoria for a year or so, but I didn't know what it was back then. The first time it happened was the first time that I saw a picture of a naked woman and the sense of dissonance of I'll never look like that. And then it had happened numerous times since. And me and my mum were sat and we put Who Framed Roger Rabbit on. Jessica Rabbit walks out dancing and I had that dissonance. I had that I'll never look like that. And I had this real confusing mess in my head. And I turned to my mum and I was like, Mum, do any real women look like that? And my mum said, no real woman looks like that. Women like that are created. I didn't really pay attention for a while because I was sat thinking, I can create this. And I realised the first thing, if you're going to create something, the first thing I needed was a name. And that's why I chose Jessica.
Even though she'd chosen Jessica at 11, she only fully came out as Jessica 3 years ago. Until then, people would still use her birth name, her dead name. Because coming out isn't one moment, or even a nice, neat, straight line. It's a process of twists and loops. And the reaction of family and friends can move you forward or push you right back.
My dad used to publish motorcycle magazines. And I grew up around going to Bulldog Bash and these big Hells Angels events and drag racing. And although it's not really a queer scene, it's a very alternative scene. I was worried about how they take transition, but my dad did a little, because they live in Spain, my parents, and they flew over and they went round and saw all their mates in person to tell them about me, so that they could deal with any weirdness and any difficulties. So privileged compared to so many trans people having the parents that I have.
For Jessica, one backwards shove in her transition came from another alternative scene, the metal scene of Macclesfield, that had made up her friendship circle for years.
I just got the phone call off my mate Dave saying, hi dead name, what's this? I hear you like to dress in women's underwear and suck dick. You know, these little comments that I would then go, everybody's fucking talking about this. Everybody is. And every time one of those comments happened, it would just push me further back because I'd feel more like a laughing stock. I'd feel more like a joke. And I just stayed out of Macclesfield for several years.
Now, a few years into her transition, she's feeling more confident. Holding her mohawk high, the skirts of her gothic dress sweeping the floor, she knows people will look, but she wants it to be on her terms. She needs to feel fully prepared.
Right at the start of my transition, makeup was really important. I wouldn't leave the house without it. And at that point in my life, passing, being viewed as a cis woman was more important than anything. And then once I got to a point with my body and my face where I don't hate what I see in the mirror, passing stopped mattering as much in Bristol, because it's like a queer city that's got lots of people of all different types. But then somewhere like Macclesfield, we're going out tonight, so I'm dressing up. So if I don't combine that with makeup, I'll feel all the glances. It's people who glance, do a double take, and then the double take isn't them thinking, or it doesn't look like them thinking, oh wow, look at her clothes, or oh wow, she's got a mohawk, or whatever. It's the double take that then is coupled with a look of disgust. And a lot of people's reaction to clocking a trans person is this look of real disgust that I got a lot in the first year of my transition, and it was really difficult to deal with. And even though I'm hearing from people that things here have changed, I haven't experienced that yet. Maybe when we go out today I will feel like stuff has changed, and maybe tomorrow I won't need a face of makeup. But I doubt it. That doesn't seem likely to me. It does feel like war paint in a way. It feels like this is a protective measure that I need to do to feel safe here. So I've got this little pot of foundation that I mix myself from 2 different foundations because nothing's quite right for my really pale but freckly skin tone. And I'm thinking about doing some eyeshadow. I'm not going to do lippy because when I was first out, I'd have everything. Lippy, liner, mascara. Oh, mascara's a definite. I'll be putting mascara on today. It's really important for me to not then retreat and not want to be out and about and be experiencing the town as it is now, because that look brings up all the internalised problems, the internalised transphobia, the internalised self-hate and doubt. And I guess that comes back full circle to why I left this town in the first place, because of the rumours that were spread about me, because of the people I came out to, and then I guess I never knew what was being said behind my back. I guess I never knew what people were thinking. But I suppose it's the random strangers now that are the bigger concern. Because you never know how strangers are going to react. Some people are violent towards trans people.
And some people are. More and more according to statistics. Trans hate crime is up 332% in the past 6 years in the UK. And of course, those are only the incidences reported and don't represent all of the hostilities encountered daily. The friends she's meeting are those who weren't overtly cruel. There's other old friends though she really doesn't want to see. They've moved on from taunts and gossip to campaigning online against trans women's rights.
Macclesfield has quite a healthy population of anti-trans folks. There is a chance they'll turn up. They might not turn up necessarily to hassle me purposefully. They might turn up just to see me, just to be like, oh, let's go and look at the state of her. If I try and put my head in the mind of a transphobe, I assume that they imagine me looking exactly like I did, probably still with my beard, maybe some false boobs. I imagine them having a view of trans folks that's quite negative, that's quite shaped in stereotypes from bad 90s movies. So maybe they'll turn up to, in their eyes, laugh. I've got nothing to be ashamed of and nothing to hide anymore. I'm not exactly shy about being trans. I've got a tattoo on my hand that's about trans people. It's Spanish. It says, Hey niños con vulvas y niñas con penes y transfóbicos sin dientes. And it means there's boys with vulvas and girls with penises and transphobes with no teeth. So yeah, that's my attitude for Macclesfield. Mill Street, which is the main street that runs through the town. Mill Street on a Saturday night used to be where you get in a fight. And there's part of me that's almost like wants to walk down Mill Street on the Saturday night as myself and see what happens. But I don't know if that's looking for catharsis or just looking for trouble.
I know we do know, Charles. Yeah, we went to it.
Can I have one Gordon's and tonic, one pink Gordon's and tonic, and one each side?
I was like, oh, are people making a comment? But I couldn't hear them loud enough, so I didn't care.
You're alright. You exist. You breathe.
She sits talking in bars and meets friends and strangers. She even walks home through Mill Street with no fights. But she's been looking over her shoulder all night, and being in a place that you don't feel safe is exhausting.
Mac was a bit overwhelming. Like, our first encounter with a stranger talking to us ended in a misgendering. But then seeing my friends was actually really good. I was surprised at how lovely and accepting everyone was. Like, I didn't feel the need to put on makeup today. I've not even shaved today. I'm just like, fuck it, I'll go goblin mode.
Now, back to the main event. Back in 2019, Ibby Caputo, a print journalist from Arkansas, arrived on her first trip to London, strolled up to the podium at our last RAFA showcase, and stole the judges' hearts with a story that was both global and deeply personal. You can actually watch it happen on our Wicker YouTube channel, but not right now. Don't do that right now. In around 26 minutes and 37 seconds, you'll be able to meet Ibby for yourselves and ask her any questions you like arising from her award-winning piece. But now, let's hear Ibby introduce us to A Perfect Match.
Hello. You're listening to A Perfect Match on the BBC World Service. It's a personal story about bone marrow transplantation that illuminates a much larger story about healthcare disparities in the U.S. And it all started with a very close friendship.
Ow. Okay. My name is Priyanka, and I'm from the beautiful country of Jamaica. I just want to say that I'm happy to be here. I'm happy that I met Ibby Caputo. She is very moody at times, but she understands my crazy. So we're perfect. The yin to my yang, literally black and white.
I could listen to Priyanka's laugh again and again. I'm Ibby Caputo, the yin to her yang, the white to her black. Priyanka and I called ourselves blood sisters because we were a tight-knit support group of two. In the 9 years we knew each other, there was one story we would tell every time we saw each other. The story of how we met.
Okay, let's just tell this story.
Let's tell the story.
I walk in, I'm very tiny, I'm shaky, and I have a cane, and I'm bald.
And she wore those horrible chemo hats. Shoot me now.
And I was wearing my favorite bright pink sweater because I wanted to look good for my doctor.
Horrible cliche.
It was 2008, and I had just walked into the blood lab at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston for my weekly blood check. Whenever I saw someone in the waiting room around my age, I tried to sit next to them, because it's lonely being a young adult with cancer.
So I sit down and I'm like, I like your style.
And so I say, tonks. And then I realize she's not going to understand. I said, thank you.
Because that was patois. And then I look and I see her wristband and I'm like, she's sick?
And I said, it's not my usual clinic day. I'm here for a consult for transplant. And she said, oh, I did a transplant too.
Actually, it was more like, that's what I just did.
And she's like, I did not expect this at 26. And I gave her the look like, what the hell? My friend looked old.
I thought I looked like a 12-year-old.
No.
You mean I looked like an 82-year-old?
Yeah, you looked old. I wouldn't guess 26. 20s would never be in my mind. So I'm like, oh my God, what I'm going to go through is horrible.
And I was like, oh my God, I just totally scared this woman. She's not going to get the bone marrow transplant now and she's going to die of leukemia.
Priyanka was also 26 at the time, and she had the same type of aggressive leukemia that I had had. The only cure was a stem cell transplant, also known as a bone marrow transplant.
And then you said, don't worry, everybody's different.
You make me sound better than I sounded. It was more like, everybody's different.
And so I think it made me feel better in the sense that it's a good thing you mentioned all the issues you had, but then you were still hopeful. So it's like, worst case scenario, I catch all this then I'm still here.
Soon after we met, Tarika did have a bone marrow transplant. She was the only other person I knew who understood what it was like, the side effects of transplant, the puffiness of steroids. We could talk about it all, and we made each other laugh.
Pause, let me laugh.
You can laugh.
The bone marrow is the factory for making the blood. Cancer had infiltrated our blood, and the only way to rid ourselves of that cancer was to get a new factory. For us, that meant injecting blood stem cells from a healthy donor, which would create new marrow. That new marrow would then make blood that was cancer-free. We both received stem cells from anonymous donors, men we did not know. We talk about them sometimes. I was fascinated that I now bleed my donor's blood, complete with his DNA and XY chromosomes. My blood is male.
What is it like for you having somebody else's blood run through your body? Do you think of it as his blood or do you think of it as your blood?
I own that. What? Whose blood?
The recovery from transplant is long and complicated. After 7 years, I was finally emerging from the side effects. But Tarika was still in the thick of it. She wanted to meet her donor in person, but not yet.
Because I've been roller coasting through my health. I'm looking for a time where I'm looking good. Never want to meet your donor looking like, this is what my blood did to you. It should be like, this is what my blood did.
And why do you want to meet him?
Because I want to touch him. I want to hold him. I want to love him for the rest of my life. What? That kind of sound creepy.
No.
Why I want to meet him? I think it would be awesome for him to see what I look like in person.
And like the life he saved. His blood saved you.
His blood saved me.
When you get a bone marrow transplant, what you're really getting is a new immune system, so it affects your whole body, and there are opportunities for things to go wrong. Tarika didn't end up meeting her donor because she never completely recovered from transplant. In 2017, she died. After her death, I thought a lot about our donors. My donor was a German man. He and I were a so-called perfect match, meaning all of the immune system genes that the doctors checked for in me were identical in him. This is important because the better the match, the less likely your new immune system will attack your own body. Tarika didn't have a perfect match, but she did have a really good match. A match her doctors told her would work. And it did work. Her new bone marrow killed the leukemia, and those of us who loved her got to spend 9 cancer-free years with her. But she was also plagued by the side effects of transplant, which is a risk that comes with the potentially life-saving cure. My own doctor has told me I'm fortunate to have emerged relatively unscathed, and this is true. But it's also true that as a white person, I was 3 times more likely than a black person to find a perfect match. After Tarika's death, I wondered about this glaring disparity and how it plays a part in who is more likely to live and who is more likely to die from blood cancer. What I found is an all too familiar story. Really, a broken record.
This is Democracy Now!
Not long after Tarika died, I started hearing news reports like this one.
A nationwide campaign has been launched to find a blood stem cell donor for a 29-year-old journalist who was recently diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. Lina Anwar desperately needs a stem cell transplant, but she doesn't match any of her family members or any of the 19 million people in a national registry. A campaign urging people of South Asian descent was launched to donate stem cells to
Lina Anwar, a 29-year-old American journalist of South Asian descent, needed a transplant to treat the same aggressive leukemia Tarika and I had suffered from. But there was no donor match for her, not in the registry in the U.S. or in any bone marrow registry in the world. Because when it comes to matching bone marrow, ethnicity matters.
we are all different across the world, and where you come from happens to affect what your HLA type may be.
Vikram Patanayak is the director of the Histocompatibility Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. His lab determines whether a donor's HLA type matches a patient's. HLA stands for human leukocyte antigen, a cluster of immune system genes.
And so it's easiest to get matched to somebody who shares your ancestry.
But the biggest registries in the world are in the US and Germany, and most of the donors on these registries are white people descended from Europe. A spokesperson from the US registry, known as Be the Match, says they've done market research to try to understand the lack of diverse participation. She says the biggest challenge is that many people aren't aware that donors are needed, that ethnicity matters, and even that the registry exists. Joining the registry is as simple as signing up online and mailing in a cheek swab.
We need to get as many people in these registries as possible, because if you are from a minority population, you need all of the chances to find a match as you possibly can.
And it is all about chances.
My name is Abbas Anwar. I'm Lina's older brother. You know, I told Lina that I was going to do this interview, and she knew. She knew about you. And while she doesn't know you personally, she had heard about you, so she told me a little bit about it.
Yeah, I think as a fellow journalist, it's amazing because I've never met your sister, but I'm really thinking about her.
Yeah, and thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
When Lina Anwar didn't have a match on the registry, her friends and family connected with Be the Match to get more people of South Asian descent to sign up. They also held donor drives in India. Thousands of people joined the registry on behalf of Lina.
And while we didn't find anyone for Lina, the last I heard, there have been 5 different matches for other people due to the efforts from the campaign to get more people on the registry for Lina.
Which means 5 more people got the chance to be cured. So the efforts to diversify the registry did pay off, just not for Lina. But Lina did still get a transplant.
So they used me as the donor. I was about a 60% match.
Medicine has evolved in the more than decade since I had a transplant. Back then, not having a match on the registry was a death sentence. The fact that Abbas could be his sister's match represents a major breakthrough in bone marrow transplantation.
And it's opened up transplants to ethnic groups that really couldn't have transplants before.
Rick Jones is the director of bone marrow transplantation at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, where the protocol for this type of transplant was developed. Lina's brother was what's called a haplo-identical match, basically a half match. Abbas and his sister had some identical genes, and others were mismatched. But doctors at Johns Hopkins figured out that if they give the patient a specific chemotherapy drug after transplant, a family member that's a half match can be as good as a perfect match on the registry.
All parents are half-match donors. All children are half-match donors. Half of your siblings are half-match donors.
This means that many people who don't have a match, especially those from ethnicities that are underserved by the registry, can still get a potentially life-saving treatment. Dr. Jones says this is crucial for Johns Hopkins because the population surrounding the hospital in Baltimore is majority African American.
And we aren't serving our population unless we look for a way to do transplants in them. If we can't treat African Americans, we're not doing our job.
This medical advancement is a big deal. It's an example of how science can be used to narrow the gap on some disparities. It has and will continue to help doctors save many lives that otherwise would not have been saved. But it doesn't change the fact that white people with European ancestry have more opportunities to find the best possible match, and we have better outcomes overall. Abbas says that after transplant, his sister Lina was doing really, really well for about 6 months. But by the time we talked in March, things had changed.
Lina unfortunately relapsed a couple months ago, so she's actually back in the hospital getting some treatment, some chemo, It's actually not a great situation from her end, but she's hanging in there.
Yasin wal Qur'anil Hakim.
On March 26th, 9 months after her transplant, Lina Anwar died. She was 30. When Lina died, her family and friends gathered online because of COVID-19 restrictions. Imam Khalid Latif led them in prayer.
Our sister Lina was battling leukemia for quite some time. And many of you, mashallah, came together to ensure that not just for her, but for a quite large underrepresented demographic also in need of transplants. Thousands of people were registered and swabbed. And there are so many others who are going to be able to find their own healing because of the efforts that you put in, that she again becomes the catalyst for.
I started reporting this story because my friend died, and then a fellow journalist died, and I'm still standing. And I wondered, why?
Everybody always wants to know exactly, what was the point at which the outcome was determined.
Stephanie Lee is the current president of the American Society of Hematology and a transplant doctor at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in Seattle.
And I just think, as with most of medicine, it is so complicated, it can be very hard to tell that.
I know, it is complicated. After Tarika died, I was devastated, and I wanted answers. So I investigated the disparity in the registry, but that couldn't tell me why she died. In fact, nothing could. But in the process of looking, I began to see that there was something much bigger going on. Maybe Tarika and Lina's deaths are like hurricanes. It's not possible to say that any one powerful storm is caused by climate change, but we know that hurricanes in general are strengthened by warming waters. I know it's not possible to pinpoint exactly why either of these two women died, but still, hurricanes. Dr. Lee has studied disparities in blood cancer treatment and survival rates.
And the message is always the same, which is that some populations are not doing as well when they get these diagnoses. And why is that, and what can we do about it?
When diagnosed with blood cancer, most people of color, especially African American and Hispanic patients, are more likely than whites to die of the disease.
Given the disparities that exist in this country, it's not surprising that they would also exist in medical procedures.
Blacks, Hispanics, and most people of color are also less likely than whites to get a bone marrow transplant.
A lot of what we think is happening is people not getting to the transplant center, either themselves or their doctors not thinking that this is a reasonable treatment for them and not referring them.
There was a paper published in 2019 in the Journal of Clinical Oncology that looked at what researchers call barriers to transplant. The paper questioned if transplant was a miracle treatment for the few, but off limits to many. People who could benefit from a bone marrow transplant aren't getting them for a variety of reasons. If a patient doesn't have someone who can take at least 3 months off work to care for them full time after transplant, doctors may choose not to transplant them. If they don't live near a transplant center or can't afford to pay for accommodation near a center, then they may not be able to get a transplant. If a person has other health problems or mental health issues or a history of not complying with medical advice, then they may not be considered for transplant. If a person is uninsured or has inadequate insurance, they may not be able to get a transplant. In other words, many of the disparities in bone marrow transplantation are systemic issues that plague American society and its healthcare system. Poverty, social inequality, unequal access to health care and health insurance. What struck me was that it seems that a lot of the barriers, they appear to be the same barriers that you see in other aspects of medicine. And in fact, now with COVID, like the same kind of barriers that are making it much more likely that Black and brown people are going to die of COVID. And I'm wondering if that's a fair assessment.
I think that is a fair assessment. COVID has really highlighted the disparities. And that's not even talking about transplant, right? That's just talking about who gets diseases and how they're treated and what the final outcome is.
This is the broken record. It plays over and over and over again. For people of color, especially for African Americans, pervasive and chronic inequalities are baked into almost every aspect of American life. Everywhere you look, it's the same story, reinforcing itself, difficult to untangle. That's why it's called systemic racism. Dr. Lee acknowledges that there are some studies that show that patients who actually make it to transplant have similar outcomes regardless of their race and ethnicity. But in other studies, you still see the same disparities in outcomes after transplant.
I think the key take-home point is that, with very rare exceptions, do you ever find these groups doing better? They may do the same, which is what we hope for, but many of them are saying they do worse, and very, very vanishingly few are showing that they do better. And so when you see that sort of consistent message across multiple studies using different techniques in different populations, then I think you can actually really believe it.
It's really not that hard to believe. Evelyn Hammonds is the chair of the Department of the History of Science at Harvard University and a professor of African and African American Studies.
Race and institutional racism is not something that most physicians have to think about. And that's just connected to the ways in which most white people don't have to think about what white privilege and what white supremacy really means. And that is as true in the medical profession as it is in the legal profession, as it is among the police, and et cetera, et cetera.
As I read more and more about racial and ethnic disparities in bone marrow transplantation, it became clear that there was one glaring omission from nearly all of the papers on it. The insidious culprit was not named. Racism. Structural, systemic, institutional racism. And I'm wondering, is it important for that to be named?
Oh, I think it's profoundly important for it to be named. And I think this is the moment when we're finally, scholars and activists, as well as medical researchers and practitioners, are beginning to name it.
I've examined my experience with cancer from all different angles, from what it was like to go through treatment-induced menopause at 26, to how I can't make tears anymore because of complications to transplant, to how I was uninsured when I was diagnosed, but because I was in Massachusetts, a state with progressive health laws, I received a life-saving treatment and never saw a bill. Now I'm examining how my race played a part, how I looked like the majority of my doctors and nurses. When I told Professor Hammonds this, she brought up an article about how Serena Williams had to fight to get doctors and nurses to take her symptoms seriously after childbirth. She had blood clots in her lungs.
Probably the most recognizable athlete in the world, probably one of the best athletes in history. She had a very difficult pregnancy. And what it says in the article is she talks about how her doctors would not listen to her. Who would not be paying attention to what Serena Williams has to say? The difference between you and Serena Williams is not her Wimbledon titles. It's that you had doctors who were listening to you, and she had doctors who, at a very late moment, finally did.
I saw this happen to Tarika. It was a few years before she died. Complications brought her back to the hospital. She was in bed, and my husband and I were sitting on a bench against the wall. A white doctor came in with updates on Tarika's treatment, but as he spoke, he trained his eyes on the two white people in the room. My husband and I avoided his gaze. We looked at Tarika, we looked at the ground, but he didn't change his focus. He didn't even ask if Tarika was okay with us being in the room before he started sharing her medical details.
Why would he do that? Right. I say that with certain irony, but that's it. She's not, they can't see what they cannot see.
Tarika used to kid me about what she called my first world mentality. But only while reporting this story have I really come to realize what she meant. I view things from a place of privilege. I expect things to go a certain way. I expect to be treated with respect. Tarika laughed at my outrage over the doctor, but she agreed to let me complain to the hospital. The next day, she told me that the hospital's patient advocate came to talk with her, that she was a Black woman, and that she sat down and they commiserated over how they have to deal with this kind of thing all the time.
It happens all the time.
Because racism has always been a part of American medicine. Professor Hammond says that when people think about racism in medicine, they focus on a few signature examples, like James Marion Sims, the father of gynecology, who operated without consent or anesthesia on enslaved Black women, or the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, a study run by the federal government on African American men who were never told they had syphilis and never given penicillin to treat it.
So you have these episodes that are often referred to, and people, react in horror, outrage. Many people who are trained as physicians say that's not regular medicine. That's not how we do our work on a day-to-day basis. But those examples are flashpoints of the deeper systemic issues that produce the kinds of disparities that we're talking about. The disparities aren't just produced by socioeconomic conditions, they're also produced by the activities and the beliefs and practices of medical professionals.
Professor Hammond says it's time medical schools teach the history of racism in American medicine. She says today's med students are eager for this information because we're not separate from that history. We've never been separate from it. It's present in the very marrow of our society. And if you don't believe it, all you need to do is ask, who was more likely to live and who was more likely to die of blood cancer? You've been listening to A Perfect Match on the BBC World Service, produced and presented by me, Ibby Caputo. Editing and sound design by Ben Shapiro. A Perfect Match was produced in association with New York University's Reporting Award and the Whickers Radio and Audio Funding Award.
Ibby, you're still standing. Now stand up now and come and join me down at the front. Take a seat. Welcome, welcome. Whoa, how does that feel?
A little surreal, listening to it in an auditorium. I'm just going to grab some water. Matt, did you drink out of this water? Okay, good, thanks.
It's wonderful to have Ibby here. I'm just going to check with Emily. Emily, how long have we got? We've got 10 minutes. Oh, brilliant. Okay, so has anybody got their question ready to go right now? Because Tilly, yes, right down here on second row, Tilly. A beautifully sterilised microphone is ready for you to go for it.
Hi, V. So I watched your pitch from 2019 and the judges were asking about how you're going to balance the backdrop of your friendship with Tarika, with the experts. Yeah, you have a couple of experts in the actual final story, and I was very curious how you decided to contact them and how they form a part in your story in the end, and how you weave like the friendship, the stats, the wider issues together in the structure. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. So I interviewed 26 people, and a lot of it was during COVID. So that was tricky because I had to actually teach the subjects to record themselves. But I interviewed them, and I just kept going until I found the people who really had passion and were able to explain things clearly, and also knew about the science and knew about disparities. So the story, when I first started, I thought the story was going to be about the disparity in the registry. And then my reporting, I found out that that wasn't the story anymore. So, there's always this panic moment when working on really any story where I'm pretty sure nothing's going to happen. I've lost it. I'm going to fail. But then you just have to like push through that tunnel and keep going. So how did I decide? Because the story that I thought it was going to be was not the story. You know, I thought it was going to be Tarika and me throughout the whole thing. But when I realized that that wasn't going to be the story, I had to figure out what was the story, and it really became a journalist's journey. So sort of, you know, I really just reported on my process in finding out who had studied disparities in bone marrow transplantation and what had they found. Does that answer your question? Okay, good.
Thank you. Anybody else? Alan, take your beautifully sanitized microphone. Talk to us.
I think this is just amazing, this piece. And I'm really struck by how you managed to balance the really intense personal aspects of this story with the forensic journalism, and how you were presenting and producing and framing the whole thing, you know, down to that very last use of the word marrow, and where you were, whether you had a mirror along the way, whether you had someone who was kind of helping keep you kind of centered on it, because there are so many points at which you could have easily been tilted, you know, from a campaigning point of view or from a very personal point of view in one direction or another.
So for the last probably 6 years, I've been editing radio, and I think the editing skills really help because I basically self-edit. And then Ben Shapiro was my editor, but his editing style and my editing style are totally different, which was amazing. You know, I'm kind of, as Mads can attest, kind of like hands-on. I'll ask questions here, I'll ask questions there, and you know, when I worked for National Geographic for a while, I did a lot of rewriting. Ben's not like that at all. He'll just sort of like ponder questions, and we'll like talk about things. And it was just great because he helped me see where there were windows. But the parts that you're talking about with the forensic science plus the personal, I don't know. I mean, I think when I work on audio, I think about the audience, and I'm just so terrified that I'm going to lose the audience. So and it's also the musicality of it. Like, how many beats of science can I get in before I'm going to lose them? And I desperately don't want to lose them, especially on a piece as important as this. So I think in that way I was my own mirror, but Ben definitely helped me find windows.
Who did you perceive as your audience to be? You had such a clear vision of them, but it was its first platform was on the World Service, which went out to an audience potentially of 60 million. And yet you have a very clear idea of who your audience is.
I think so. My audience is what it sounds like to hear the piece. So like when we're making audio, we're listening. It's sort of like the way you can hear your own voice in your head, but you can't hear the way other people hear you. And I only sort of figured out how to do this once I started editing other people. I started figuring out how to create audio as a listener, like from the listener experience. So in that sense, my audience isn't really like a group of people. That's sort of like the ear. I'm working for the listener's ear.
One very small part of your audience was Tarika's family. How did they react?
So that was interesting. Tarika's family at first actually they didn't say no, but they were not on board fully. They when I first proposed it, which was surprising to me, but also showed my own blind spot. They basically said, we don't want to participate, and asked me not to include certain aspects, which I didn't include. And that was actually my biggest anxiety throughout the whole thing was, am I going to create something that they would be happy with? And
that would be not hard for them to listen to. And what happened was when it came out on the BBC World Service, I had actually asked Tarika's mom for her blessing, and she didn't respond. But I had to move ahead because I had funding from the Whickers and from the New York NYU Audio Award. So I was committed, and also it's an important story. And Tarika, was 35 when I interviewed her. So, I had a consenting adult. But what ended up happening was after the doc came out, I sent it to her family, and they actually were very happy with it and were enthusiastic about it. Her friends were awesome about it, really happy about it. And her mom gave me her blessing. Sort of after it happened, her mom wrote me and gave me her blessing, which was amazing.
They said you caught her.
They did. They said that I really got Tarika's, you could hear her laughter. I didn't include all the time she made fun of me in that interview, but I could have, She was fun.
Now, going to the other part of Alan's question about it's not a campaign, it's a journalistic piece, and it's a deeply personal authored journalistic piece. But have you had any evidence that this has done any good for people rethinking about the possibility of signing up to the register? Have you had any evidence or feedback on that side?
I did have feedback. So it aired, after airing on the BBC, it aired on NPR's Code Switch, which is a very popular podcast in the U.S., maybe in the world, I don't know the numbers. But after it aired on NPR's Code Switch, the numbers, Be the Match got a boost. So Be the Match is the National Bone Marrow Donor Registry in the U.S., and I think they got like a 5% boost from the January before. So that turns out to it's a few people, like a few extra people will get a chance. It was something like several hundred people extra. So that made me happy. And yeah.
Any more questions? Oh, one more question. Yes. Come on, Tilly, third row. Pass it down. Yes.
Hi, Ibby. It was so beautiful, your piece. That was amazing. My question was, so you've been through this experience, right, with Tarika, and I was wondering about kind of how long you had it sort of ruminating around your mind and deciding that you actually wanted to make this piece and broadcast it and research and really sort of delve into it, and how you felt about maybe how important that was for you and your journey. The kind of time period for that.
Yeah. So grief is a really interesting thing to work with. I didn't think about doing a story on it until a year after she died. I was out with some friends who were journalists. Most of my friends in Boston are journalists, and I was visiting. And we were out at brunch, and I don't know, I just sort of I had a meltdown, I thought I was fine, and then it just hit me that it was the anniversary of her death. And I started telling my friends about this thing that had been on my mind, that I had a perfect match and she didn't have a perfect match. And they were journalists, so they encouraged me to report the story. And then I thought, I guess that's what I should do. And then it took another year to acquire funding. And I really don't think I would have done it if I hadn't received support, because it would have been really an emotional toll to do it without that kind of vouch. So I did receive support, and then I was committed. So, I just had to keep pushing through.
And thank goodness for that. Warm round of applause for Ibby Caputo.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's so lovely to have you here. I hope you have found tonight interesting. Hands up if you think we could do this again sometime. Maybe. Oh, yes. Do carry on the conversation upstairs, one floor above. Free drinks in the bar. You've just got to wave your blue Whickers sticker at them. And huge thanks to you all for joining us tonight. Good night.